that Hermes, or both Hermes, the final person with whom we are concerned, was actually a ritualistic personification. In other words, that this so-called person was the symbolic impersonation of an idea, and that with the gradual passing of time, this person became real, although no one seemed to know where he came from, who he was, or how he departed from this life. If he was a person in a sacred drama, a character in ritualism, a hero signifying universal mind, or even human mind in its noblest and broadest sense, this person could become identified with a story. Ritualism could create a life for him, create situations, but these situations would be essentially symbolical rather than literal, although they might be very well set forth in a rather literal appearing relationship. That such may have been the case in the situation involving Hermes is not unreasonable, for we know that even Clement refers to the Hermetic system as broadly and deeply ritualistic. Wherever ritualism becomes important, we have this tendency for the emergence of a prominent or principal ritual personality who becomes the actual embodiment of the doctrine, the procedure, and all that has to do with a system of religious philosophy or mysticism. We know also that it is quite possible for imaginary or ritualistic persons to gradually gain historical definition. A good example, of course, is the story of the Count of Monte Cristo, who had no existence except in the fertile imagination of Alexander Dumas the father. Yet even today, tourists are taken out to the prison where he was imprisoned, and his cell is carefully and faithfully shown to them. The fact that he never existed is of no particular importance anymore. Now, there have been a number of instances in which imaginary persons have so taken the public fancy that we prefer to accept them as factual. Now, this is on a secular level. If we add to this the aura of divinity, creating a mystery and framing within this mystery a transcendent being, there is every reason to assume that it might be perpetuated as an historical person. So we have, in summary, about three broad possibilities here. One, that we are dealing with a divinity representing a universal state of consciousness, and that this divinity simply descended into the Greek period of Egyptian philosophy and was regarded as the patron of a school or system. The second is that this divinity was represented by embodiments, and that therefore priestly initiates, teachers, authors, and scribes may have received this name and have therefore been regarded as this person. And the third, that he is a ritual figure, as we will find in many other religions and philosophical systems. With this situation as broadly expressed as we can, we then come to the intricate problem of dating the Hermetic philosophy. Nearly always we must date a subject, particularly an unknown work, by context, by a study of the structure, by a study of the internal ideas presented. It is nice to assume that ideas can be born out of time, or that they can appear full born and full grown like Minerva from the head of Zeus. But actually this is very rarely, if ever, the case. Every idea of man is set into a framework of time and place. The average person, and even the average highly informed person, cannot be totally unhistorical. He cannot have attitudes that are totally unknown to the world in which he lives, nor can he develop an idiom or a form of expressing himself that is completely outside of the language structure of his own time. Thus, through idiom, through structure, and through various colloquialisms, forms in grammar, and other instruments, it is nearly always possible to historically establish a work within a very few years. An example of this, of course, a good example, is the early Rosicrucian manifestos. The Famous and Confessio Fraternitatis and the Chemical Marriage of Christian Rosenkreutz, these books are supposed to have been written much earlier than their date of publication. Actually, however, by studying them, we discover that no matter when they were written or how they were written, they could not have been written before the rise of Martin Luther, because there are certain ideas incorporated into them in certain patterns which did not exist or were not known before that date. Thus, the earlier dating must be regarded as largely mythological. Now, in the study of the Hermetic writings, as they are preserved for us, we are in the presence of certain elements or factors that cannot be denied. The first is that they do not represent the philosophy of the ancient Egyptian. They are not a bona fide perpetuation of the ancient Ammonistic doctrine of the principal Egyptian systems. They are not grounded or set in the Osirian cycle or the great restoration of Egyptian religion, nor can we clearly find them oriented into the temporary reforms of Akhenaten. That these teachings are not classical Egyptian, we must finally accept, because our gradually increasing knowledge of Egyptian literature and a number of recent discoveries on the dramatic and ritualistic and mystical writings of the Egyptians, apart from their funereal texts, all these prove conclusively that the Thoth of ancient Egypt is not actually the Thoth Hermes of the Hermetic philosophy. We must come down to a more recent time in order to find the inspiration behind Hermeticism as we know it. There is every reason to assume from the text and the study that the works could not have been written earlier than the time of the rise of the golden age of Greek philosophy. Therefore, that the writings could not, in their surviving structure, be earlier than the 3rd or 4th century BC. Also, there are other elements involved. Elements coming from the eastern side, indicating strong Oriental influence. And this Oriental influence is of a type which could not be any earlier than the golden period of Grecian thought, the so-called Age of Pericles. Therefore, assuming this to be the earliest possible date, and remembering always that the earliest known versions of these works are in Greek, we must also determine, if possible, the latest conceivable date. And knowing the quotations from the Hermetic writings made by the Fathers in the 1st and 2nd century, we can say with reasonable certainty that this work, the Corpus Hermeticum, must have been compiled or brought together in a period of approximately 300 years, not earlier then the middle